Hello, welcome to another episode of the DSL podcast. I am your host, Dave Cole. Today's guest is a good friend of mine, John Thompson. John, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Dave. How you doing today?
Great. I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to talking about the future of data with John. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to give a sort of a brief introduction to John. John is a best-selling author of two books. His first book, let me make sure I get this right, John, is How to Win with Intelligence. And his second book is Building Analytics Teams. So I have read your second book. Sadly, admittedly, I have not read your first, but it's on my backlog of things to read. And I'm also hearing, yes, I know. I'm also hearing that you have another book that's coming out soon too. Can you tease that book? And I think we'll be talking a bit about that today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dave. It's so great to be here with you. I always enjoy our conversations and our time together. Yeah, the third book is called The Future of Data. I've just started writing it, so I'm very excited. The second book, Building Analytics Teams, I wrote in the span of 3 months, 100,000 words in 3 months, so I cranked that out. This book I'm taking a little bit more time on. I'm spending time looking at what the EU regulations are, some of the new proposed regulations on AI, the California Privacy Act, what has been done with data, since online properties have come around. It's really going to be a book about it. I've written 2 nerd books is what I've done. And what I want to do is I want to write a book for the general society. Because, when I talk to people don't really understand what's going on with their data. And they're absolutely freaked out or concerned or fearful. And I want them to understand a little bit about what's happened with data, where we are today, and where we're going. Because I really want everybody to be empowered, about their data and have a voice and go to the government, rise up, people. Let's do something about what's happening with our data. Let's take back the power about our data. Let's get a data dividend. Let's get paid for our data. I'm fired up. I'm ready to go. I want this to be a movement.
This is going to be interesting. I definitely want to delve into this because I think, given my background, I have also worked for a third-party data provider, and I have a lot of sort of experience in that world, and I understand a bit about it. Probably not as much as you, since you're writing a whole book on it. But I think there are a lot of misconceptions out there about how their data is being used. But I also think there's a lot of things to certainly you need to be aware of, right? And I think we'll dive into that. But that writing books is just what you do for fun. You do have a job, and you are the global head of advanced analytics and AI for CSL Behring, and have been for the last, I guess, almost 3 years now. So you're also a DSL, and you don't just write books. So let's dive in. All right. So clearly you're concerned about how data is being collected, probably unknowingly, about many just the general populace. And is your book it sounds like it's going to be a clarion call for all of us out here to just sort of wake up to the data that's being collected about us. So help us unpack that. Let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the opportunity in the opening to talk about it. Our children are now, Jennifer and I's kids are 23 and 21. And we used to sit at the dinner table and they'd be talking about this game that they played with these little puffles. And, they were giving the people in the game their name, their address, their interests, and all this kind of stuff. So we would talk about that. And I would say, okay, you're giving them your information. What are you getting back? And they're like, oh, it's, we get to play the game. It's free. It's just our name and our age and stuff like that. We're not giving them anything. We're getting this game. And we would have conversations and say, no, that's not true. You're giving them access to who you are so they can sell you things in the game. Then they're like, oh, what are you talking about? And I would say, well, let's sit down and look at the game together. And you would see how the game would slightly change based on what information they gave them about, oh, he likes football and she likes soccer. And, the game slightly changed on how they interacted with it. So, over their lifetime, we educated them on, you're not giving something away for free. You're actually giving something of value to them, and they're monetizing it, in different ways with advertising, product placements, and those kind of things. So then the kids started coming back at dinner and saying, well, that's not really cool. They're not telling us how they're using our data, and they're not telling us what kind of trade we're making. They're just putting this out in front of us, and we're doing it. So we were having a conversation the other day, fast forward now to, this last week, and I was asking people, I said, okay, so how do you feel about the fact that you've told Amazon, you live in this house, you have a second house, what your mortgage is, the fact that your Aunt Matilda has just developed cancer, that you ride a motorcycle, that you have a child that has special needs. How do you feel about giving all that information over to Amazon and allowing them to monetize it? And they're like, I don't do that. I'm like, really? They know where you live. They know all your purchases. They know how you like to, get things delivered. They know you're sending things to Aunt Matilda. They know all these things, and you're freely giving it to them. And they're like, wow, I had no idea.
Well, I would say there is a distinction, though, between Amazon inferring things about you versus a company like Facebook, where you are freely, you're posting things on their platform that says, hey, my Aunt Matilda just got diagnosed with cancer, right? Which is a little bit more definitive in a way than inferring. So where do you draw the line then? Like what is your on the analytics? So if you're an analytics leader, right, and you're making certain inferences based on purchase behavior of your customers, are you saying that it's unethical to come to certain conclusions and then market to that person based on those conclusions?
No, not at all. I'm not saying that at all. The analogy or metaphor, I guess it's an analogy that I like to use is that, how many builders in the United States get all the lumber to build the houses for free? None. Right. Google, Facebook, all these people get this data for free. Now they would say it's a fair trade. We're giving you Gmail, or we're giving you this, or we're giving you that, for your data. And I don't think that's a fair trade. I think that if you're using my data to build your business, then you should give me a chance to get paid for it. Right. I think that the data that those companies ingest should be an expense to them. They should pay everybody for the use of that data, because no other company gets their raw materials for free. I mean, none that I know of anyway. So that's my point. I'm happy to use the data. I'm happy to be ethical. I'm happy to take transactional data and do things with it, as long as I'm helping, my customers, my donors, my patients, to have a better experience with my company, or, to have less costs incurred. But my point is that if you're using it as a raw material in your business, you should have to pay for it. And there's been some people that have done analytics, and they're like, oh, well, each person is going to get $52, and that $52 isn't going to make a difference to them. But, that's not the point. The company should have to bear that expense, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. That being said, I mean, it sounds like you're almost advocating, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm putting words in your mouth, but you're advocating for a model that says, look, if I give you my data, like, you should have to pay me in return, right? Mm-hmm. But then what happens if I say, I don't want to give you my data, but I still want to use Gmail for free, as an example, right? Are you saying, because if I'm Google, I would say, look, if you're not giving me if I'm not paying you for your data, right, then why should you get Gmail for free?
You shouldn't.
Okay, so then we're moving to a model that's very different, right? I mean, obviously there's the free content model, right, and some of the free service model is pervasive. Facebook,
right,
you name it.
And
right?
My point is that it should be optional. You go to Google, and the first thing when you're signing up for Gmail, it should be a toggle button. I'll give you my data for free. Gmail is free for you. I won't give you my data for free. Okay, you pay $52 a year for Gmail.
Got it. Okay. All right. I think that's fair. I mean, at least have that option, right?
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, choice is, and that's, now, Google is probably one of the more above board companies out there in terms of collecting data. There's a lot of companies, I mean, there's a lot of websites out there that you can happen upon that won't be nearly as ethical, right? In terms of data. I mean, absolutely. Probably some of those game-like companies, right? Those fly-by-night game companies that pop up. Now, I know that those companies are not just collecting the data and using it for themselves; they're also repackaging it, selling it down the river too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
The whole data syndication ecosystem that you and I both know well, because we have worked in those organizations, we know what's happening there. That whole industry, it was kind of like, we sold our souls back with Arthur C. Nielsen, when he was walking around, counting, each box of Tide on the shelf or something like that. It all started way back there, that the grocers, the grocery stores in America, the grocery store chains and the grocers are the people that committed the original sin in this industry, because they gave all that information to Arthur C. Nielsen and gave him all the rights to own it and resell it and repackage it. And that's basically, that's the basis of Equifax and Epsilon and Google and Facebook and Netflix and all these companies. It's all comes from that one, that origination of that business model. And it's gone. I mean, at one point it was probably a fair model. I did a ton of work, through the 80s and 90s in the retail and the CPG and FMCG market. And I was always asking the retailers, it's like, can't you just stop doing this? Stop giving your data to Nielsen, stop giving your data to IRI. The amount of money you get is a pittance. And the only people that have ever really done it was Walmart. If you remember back in the 90s, I think it was, Walmart just said, forget it. We're not giving you their data. And, IRI and Nielsen both freaked out because, I mean, how much of the U.S. market is that right. That retail channel. So it can happen. It has happened. And if people actually demand it, it will happen again.
And I do, when I think of Nielsen, I think of, the television ratings, right? The Nielsen ratings. And my recollection, I could be wrong, John, since you've probably done more research on this than I, but I thought the Nielsen families that were used as the basis for determining, what programs people were watching, like those Nielsen families did get paid in some form to get the data.
That's the media measurement side of the business. And yes, I think Arthur and his children did realize that, hey, we hoodwinked, the grocers. Hoodwinking, Joe and Sally, probably not very smart, and the people wouldn't do it either. So
no,
they tried to have
commitment.
People, they tried to have people fill out the diaries because that's what they did.
That's where it all started. It was like written down. Right now, it's more automated, but still,
and they wouldn't do it, so they had to pay them. But on the grocery retail side, that's still the business.
Okay, so let me throw out I do want to talk GDPR. I do want to talk about the CCPA. Let me make sure I have that right. The California Consumer Privacy Act, and how that impacts, us as data science leaders. But one thing I've always said is this, and John, we can agree to disagree on this one, but hey, I'm going to get ads. That's fact. Right. If you're going to if I'm going to a content site, if I'm going to ESPN, if I'm going to, watch programming for free, I don't know that people don't have, over the air TV anymore where it was free. Right. Now it's all cable and you cut the cord, et cetera. But at any rate, if I'm getting content for free, then you got to suffer through some ads, and those ads, if you're going to get those ads, right, wouldn't one prefer to get ads that you might actually be interested in than ads that have no relevance to you whatsoever?
Yeah, I would suppose that people would make that trade-off. I'm personally, I know I'm not normal, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I'm not. Every time I take a personality assessment, every time I do an assessment, I'm in the top. I'm in not the top. I'm in 1% of the population. I'm just not normal. In the the Gaussian distribution, I'm always out in a tail somewhere. And everything in my life, I pay for everything I possibly can to never get an ad served to me. I never watch live TV. I never listen to terrestrial radio. I never, any channel there is in the world where there's an ad, I assiduously avoid. So maybe I'm not the right person to ask.
Right. Well, I mean, but you still, there's ads when you go to, any website where you're reading content. Right now, there are ways in which to block those ads.
I never look at them.
You never
I
look.
can't
Yeah,
tell
well, that's the thing, though. You might not look at them, but there might be the corner of your eye, and it might have some impact on you. Might have some, there might be some incremental lift if you had not actually seen it at the corner of your eye. But at any rate, I hear what you're saying, which is like, I do not want to participate in the whole advertising business in a sense. I'm there for the content. I'm there to view the show. And if I have to suffer through some ads, like, I will block it out of my mind or what have you. Yeah. I don't know that you're alone in that thinking, and the thinking that like ads are a bit of a nuisance, right? I mean, if you talk to folks, who are in the UK where they don't have to deal with as much of ads, like there's not that culture, right, of ads like we have in the US, and they think we're crazy, right? And maybe that's where you should move to, John.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I did live in London for a few years, so
there you go. There you
go.
I'll
go back.
But still, if you go walk if you walk around London, like, you still see billboards and you see ads, all around, right? And, on the side of buses and things like that. So it's not like they don't have an advertising business, but like, if you want to get your word out, right? Like, what would you suggest to a retailer to get your word out, right? And to sell John Thompson something that he doesn't know he needs until he sees this ad?
Wow, that's a great question, because it would be really hard to get to me, to tell you the truth.
Right.
I don't really know how. Could you get to me?
Yeah. I'm
trying to think of it. Where would you be able to do it? I don't look at anything on my phone. I don't look at anything online. I don't look at anything in satellite television. So I guess physical direct mail.
Yeah,
which is kind of weird.
It's still around.
But, I do get some really interesting, high-end, expensive packages from people, and I open every one of them.
Yeah.
So you want to get
maybe
something
there's that.
from me,
Yeah.
Then,
so at any rate, we're gonna have a bit of a tangent on John's advertising picadillo here, but I think there is some, there's a lot of truth in it, right? If you were to step back and understand that, like, your data is being used to better target you and to hopefully give a retailer some incremental lift, but there's a portion of the population that sees ads as a big nuisance, and you're trying to balance these things. So you're trying not to frustrate. Like, you can absolutely inundate you. Like, you have retargeting, right, where you search on something, you search for football for your kid, and then all of a sudden all you see is football ads and sports equipment ads following you all over the place, and that's creepy, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't know if your book talks about like how retargeting works and.
No,
doesn't talk about that, but okay.
No, it might. I've only written the first chapter, so I may talk about that in the future of data. It's really I just want people to be aware of what's going on. I don't want them to have this niggling fear that something's happening to them that they don't understand. Now, I'm cool. If people go in and say, hey, I want the free services. I talked to someone the other day, I guess it was about a month ago, who's a very well-respected analytics leader, and I put this forth, and he was like allergic to the concept. He was like, what are you talking about? Google's great. They can have all my data. Facebook is awesome. I love to get all these free services. You're off your tree, and it will never change. And I'm like, I'm not telling people to change.
Yeah.
I want them to make informed choices.
Yeah, you want them. You want them to have the choice, right? They don't have the choice today, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And if they're into it and that's what they want, then cool. You understand it and you know what you're getting into. Then you're going in there eyes wide open. But I don't want people to go into it and give things away that are valuable, that they should get money for, or some compensation or consideration at least.
Yeah, and there are many DSLs out there who I'm sure who are purchasing third-party data to use to augment their models. Like, what is your perspective on that? I mean, because if from the third-party data perspective, right, from data sets that are collected, many of them would tell you that they are collecting it in an ethical way, and they would explain how it is being collected in an ethical way, and that they're only doing it with, the people's willingness and sort of opt in or maybe opt out. I know we could talk about like what is ethical in terms of opting in versus opting out. That's a whole other conversation. But At any rate, like, I mean, would you as a DSL be okay using these data sets, or are you know, or are there certain data? Would you do your background research to make sure they were collected in an ethical way? Like, where do you see that impacting you as a DSL?
Yeah, as a data science leader, yes, we use those data sets, and we're doing some really intriguing things with the data set right now that's probably going to give us, you know, a competitive advantage in our industry that no one else has even thought of. You know, and when I exposed it to some of our leadership, you know, they were just mind blown. They're like, "Wow, you're kidding. We can do that?" I'm like, "We can. Absolutely." Now, we don't go out there and dig through every, you know, agreement. You know, people say, "Oh, well, you know, we have informed consent from all the users." Wow, you probably have consent. I think informed is probably
informed.
a stretch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know, so I know that we have to do a better job on, you know, the click agreements and being able to simply and easily tell people what's going on with their data. You know, I'm not such a zealot that I won't use the data, that I'm, you know, absolutely pure and pristine in my approach. You know, we do use data. We are, you know, just assiduously careful about PII and PHI. We're a pharma company, you know.
You have to.
We can't go stomping all over the place and be careless in that area. So we're very careful there. But there is lots of data, and I think there can be lots of improvement in the industry. You know, but yes, we do use data. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. I mean, you mentioned PII. Let's talk a little bit about PII. GDPR, right? I don't remember it exactly when it sort of went into
I think it was like
practice.
15 years ago now.
Oh, really? Okay, it's longer than I thought. But at any rate, and then now we have So tell our audience a little bit. I mean, everyone and most of our audience, right, if not all, should be know the basics of GDPR, but maybe not CCPA unless you live in California. So I don't know. Maybe you can briefly give us an overview of both.
Yeah, you know, Dave and I have been around long enough that we understand these things. I've been doing this for 37 years. So I remember when GDPR, the General Data Protection Act, protection regulation, that's it, General Data Protection Regulation, was being talked about. And everybody was saying, oh, you know, no one's going to do business in Europe. No one will have a server in Europe. You know, all the data is going to be in the United States and Middle East and Asia. And Europe will be a desert. And, you know, the idea was that, you know, you as a consumer have the right to be forgotten. Yes. You know, you have the right to go in and look at the data someone has about you. You have the right to delete the data that is inaccurate. Mm-hmm. You know, these are things that we talk about now that are fairly reasonable. You know, but back then it was like, oh my gosh, the Europeans are insane. This is just terrible. You know, this can't happen. You know, but it's really turned out to be a fairly reasonable, fairly decent basis of doing business. Yeah. It's nothing crazy. And, you know, the new directive that's going in, the new data directive that's going into the EU, not the regulations that have been proposed about AI. Last February, there was a proposal to the EU to create a pan-European data commons, you know, where every organization, every retailer, every manufacturer, every consumer, all their data would flow to a central repository. And again, people were all up in arms and, oh my God, this is terrible. And Europe is going to fall apart. No one will do business in Europe. It was the same thing. I mean, almost the same conversation. And I looked at it and said, this is the future. You know, every European is going to get a data dividend. You know, and maybe it's $100, maybe it's 72 euros. I don't know, maybe it's, who knows how much it is. But, you know, you are going to have the opportunity to go in and say, you know, I'm just going to put out some scenarios. You know, I don't like companies that contribute to climate change. All right. Well, some people would say, check. I don't want the airline industry or any airlines to be able to use my data. Well, that's one way to look at it. My view is, okay, so you don't like companies that contribute to climate change. Maybe you don't like cattle farming. Maybe you don't like airlines. But you know what you should do? Is you should click the button that they can use your data, but they have to pay you 100 times more than anyone else. You know, if they want to pay that amount of money, great. You suck more money out of their organization and send it to the places that you support. Right. So, this data commons is going to be a way for the European Union, and it'll take 15 years, it'll take 20 years for this to come to be. So it's kind of funny that people that are futurists are saying this is madness, this will never happen. Well, over the long run, it will be the norm. And that's, I started talking about this stuff, I don't know, maybe 13, 15 years ago. And people were saying I was nuts, and well, maybe.
Well, you're nuts, but but maybe not about this.
We can agree on that. But that is happening. The regulations are happening. The basis of what's going on in the CCPA, and I always go and I think that's the first time I've ever said it correct. The first time I'm always like the CCCP. I'm always calling it Russian for some reason. That's the basis of the regulations there as well. And as we all know, you live in California, you know this, everybody knows this, they are the leader in the United States in regulations for emissions and privacy. This will sweep the United States over the next 15 years. This will be the norm. So, people as consumers should get on board with it because it's great for them. And businesses,
as a consumer, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean,
why would you fight it?
As if you were the company, right? And I can't believe I'm standing here being I'm sort of playing the role of the defender of these companies out there. But as the company, it's certainly going to make business harder. I mean, I can tell you just I remember when I was hearing about GDPR. My first reaction wasn't like, oh, this is a crazy and dumb idea. My first reaction was like, oh, this is gonna be a nightmare having to create systems to delete all this PII when a user or a customer calls in saying like, hey, can you forget about me? I'm just like, oh, I can't imagine how much work it's going to take to build the systems out to be able to do that in an efficient way. But you know what? If you want to do business in Europe, you have to be able to do that, right? And
that's the way it is.
And I think that I know there are companies out there that like specialize in helping make that all happen. And and I think at the end of the day, do I want my data to be used in ways that I don't approve of? Of course not. Like if I could wave a magic wand, like of course I wouldn't want that to happen. But I think when you unknowingly consent to these things, you don't realize that you're consenting to them, to the retailer or the customer or the company. Using your data in all sorts of ways that you might not be okay with.
One thing that I think is going to be a huge market, and you should probably be the chief customer officer for whoever starts this company, is going to be a data lineage company. And it's going to be someone, what you were talking about earlier, all this data has been collected through all these different channels and used in different ways. At some point, someone is going to regulate data lineage that, if it was collected from John Thompson through this app, and then it went to this aggregator, and then it ended up in this company, and then it ended up in this prediction, that model, if John Thompson, objects, that model is no longer valid because all that data lineage, says that he doesn't want to be part of it and it has to change. So I think that's an obscene example, of course, and it's an extreme example, but I do believe that whatever company can do extreme data lineage and do it well at scale, they'll be huge.
Yeah. All right. So is there anything else in the future of data? Like, how does this impact, it sounds like this is more of a general book, right? And like not necessarily your first two books were definitely more focused on, like you said, the nerds, the data scientists. I just called all my entire audience nerds. I love you, nerds. I'm a nerd myself.
In the best possible way.
The best possible way. I say that in a loving way. But at any rate, but this sounds like it's more just you're hoping to open people's eyes, right? And you're hoping to also show them that there are ideas out there. There are alternatives that you could get behind that would just make, I think, make it easier. Make it easier and for you to give up your data in a way that it is more transparent, right? In terms of how it's being used and in terms of what you get in return, right?
You're absolutely right, Dave. I want this book to be a learning experience. I've written 2 how-to books. Now I want to write a book about, hey, this is happening. You should be aware of it. It'll make your life better. Make informed choices and do business with people that are aligned with your values and are using your data in an honest, transparent way.
Yeah. You mentioned data lineage. I'm going to throw this out there. I don't know if it's, I'm not hardly a blockchain expert, but I have to think that my PII being stored in some way and then having some transaction log as it moves around. I don't know. It seems like that could be a potential vehicle for making that transparency of where your data is going a little easier. But I'm not no expert there.
Distributed ledgers, could definitely be, an immutable ledgers could definitely be a value added underpinning technology. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. Anytime you have multi-party transactions and some component of trust required, blockchain is definitely a runner, a possibility to be in the mix. You're spot on.
I want to switch gears. I want to talk a little bit about your book, Building Analytics Teams, which I have read, and one concept of it that I found I use to this day, sort of very enlightening. There's one chapter that talks about the artisanal teams and the factory sort of teams. Tell our audience a little bit more about what you meant by that in the book, and help us understand the different types of teams that you see out there.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to discuss it. It's a concept that's come about, as I noted, I've been doing this for almost 4 decades. And, and as I said before, many times I've made every mistake known to man and woman. So I really, at the core of it, I just realized the data science teams and data scientists are very creative people, and they needed to be handled and managed in a different way. So I was casting around trying to figure out ways to structure teams that we could get resilience and responsibility and accountability and individualism and creativity, all in the mix. And I came upon, I generally think of things as 2 ends of a pole. And the artisan or the artisanal team was that of where you have highly skilled, highly autonomous, highly trained individuals who could do everything. They could acquire data, they could integrate data, they could do feature engineering, they could build models, they could do subject matter expert interfacing, they could talk to executives, they could work with the IT department to get models into production. They're kind of like data science superstars, and that kind of team, is resonates with me because I like those kind of people. I like people to give them direction and let them just run. And make mistakes and blow shit up and come back with, some really creative and interesting things. Now, on the other side of the equation, is the modular factory team. And that's where you have a piece of work and you have 2 people that do data acquisition, 2 people that do feature data integration, 2 people that do feature engineering, some people that do model building and so on. And the work moves through that group. So I looked at it, and I've been part of different organizations. I've been part of 7 different startups. I've been at Dell. I'm now at CSL, a $10 billion biopharma company. And, you can't just hire a team in your image. I mean, if I hired a team in my image, it would be the uber artisan team. That would be, right. Kind of like John Galt and all that kind of crazy stuff. But, there are companies that run more like factories, even if they're not a manufacturing plant, they run like a factory. So you need your team to have a model that integrates well with the broader organization. And you can also have a hybrid team as well, which I'm building now. I've got an artisanal team or an artisan-based team, and they do a great job. They're incredible. Now I've got a bunch of work that's scaling up, that's repetitive, that needs to be done over and over again. And I've got some other visionary ideas that I want to go out and collect a ton of information, primary research, and I want to bring that back and I want to integrate it together. Well, I can tell you that the artisan data scientists don't want to do that work. They just sniff at it. They turn up their nose, they walk away. They are a bit of prima donnas too, so you got to deal with that. So I'm building a hybrid team now. So I've got a team that does all that mechanical work, and then I've got an artisan team above it. So I've got both a modular and an artisan team. So it's a great way to do data science, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certain types of problems where if you have a model that's been on production for 5 years and the business problem was well known, I don't know, you're approving loans or something like that, and like all you're really adding to the equation is new features, let's say, and there's new approaches to new algorithms you want to try out. Like that seems to be like more of a factory thing. But if there's a business problem and you don't know how to apply data science to it, like that's really where I would imagine the artisanal team is shining, right? Where their creative juices are flowing and they're whiteboarding and they're, riffing and they're, putting together POVs and things of that nature. Like that, is that basic? Do I have that right? Is that how you would describe it? Yeah.
Yeah, you do, as a matter of fact, Dave. And there's another concept that's tightly tied to it is the personal project portfolio. I was talking to someone the other day, and they said, "Yeah, we've taken your personal project portfolio and we've called it the prioritized personal project portfolio." And I'm like, "Wow, how many P's can we string together in one one acronym?" But anyway, the idea of having these portfolios is that you've experienced this. I know you have. Is that we have data scientists and they're working on a project and we're encouraging them to be on the edge and experimenting and trying things, and that project blows up because they tried something with an algorithm or they tried to integrate data and it didn't work. And what happens when that blows up, if it's the only thing they're working on, is a massive freak out. So, these people love what they're doing. They're way into it. They're super committed. And when they freak out, it's almost like a super meltdown. You get a call in the middle of the night. "Oh my God, John, it's not working." And I'm like, I don't want to hear this at midnight. I want to be sleeping, So there's a little bit of personal preservation in there too. But
Sure.
So if you give them 2 big projects, a few small projects, and some service requests, and you have a portfolio they're working on, when that project blows up, the last thing they want to do is tell you about it.
Right.
So when it blows up, they immediately switch their focus to a different project and work on it. And more often than not, what happens is that if you give them enough space, enough autonomy, they'll come back like a week later and say, "You know what? I was working on that project and it blew up and it's totally a mess. But I was working on project 2, and all of a sudden when I was out fishing or boxing or, taking a shower or whatever, this bolt of insight came to me and now the project's back on track." Now, I didn't have to hear the freak out. They were able to gestate on this idea for 5, 7, 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever it was. And then they could talk about their failure and own it in a very exciting way. Yeah. And so, I created that construct for these teams, and it's been great.
And then how do you, you track that on an individual base? Like, is there a way to track these things? Like, figure out like how much is, how to figure out when somebody's portfolio is sort of, there's too much, like dial it back. That's the job of manager, I imagine.
Yeah, that's our job.
Yeah.
Generally what you see, and this happens all the time too. So everybody listening to this, if you're going to try this, be ready for it. Every time I brought someone into my team and I've said, you're going to have a personal project portfolio, you're going to have 2 major projects. A major project is something like 6 months to 2 years long. It's a big project, a long time to work on it. You're going to have a few small projects, 2 or 3. They're going to be like a month to 4 months, something like that. And, the CEO shows up every now and then and says, "Hey, I need to understand this for the board meeting." Well, guess what? We're going to work on it. Yeah. So, you're going to get some of those too. And the first thing they say is, "That's too much. I can't do all that." But once they get past the kvetching and the bitching and the moaning, then they come back and they go, "Ooh, I kind of like this." Yeah. Because we have weekly meetings. The whole team has weekly meetings, and we never say, "What happened to that other project?" I always had that conversation in a one-on-one setting. In the team meetings, everybody's talking about what they're engaged in. So in their portfolio, they may be engaged in 2 projects or 1.5 projects, and 4 of them are on the back burner or something like that. We never talk about the back burner stuff in the meeting. We're doing code reviews. We're talking about projects. We're talking about roadblocks. We're talking about data, algorithms, all that kind of stuff. So it's a very active discussion. Every 2 weeks, I have a one-on-one with everybody. And that's where we talk about projects that are off track, or daughters and dogs and sons and car restoration and all the other things that people want to talk about. So it works out really well that way. It's it's amazing. After someone's been doing it for 2 or 3 months, they're like, I never want to go back to just having a project again.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think, I mean, just me personally, just the way I am, like I like having multiple things for exactly the same reason that you described, which is like I know that like maybe one of those projects or those ideas might not, might be a little bit of a moonshot, might fall flat, and you have other things you can point to that you can say, hey, we're working on 5 things and 3 of them are going well, 2 are off the rails, and here's why, right? And
yeah.
It makes total sense.
We all know that too, because every project we're working on, and every project you guys are working on out there, should have a business-oriented subject matter expert engaged. Sometimes those people go on vacation. Sometimes they get sick. Sometimes they are on maternity leave.
Right.
There's lots of reasons that your projects slow down or stop that are out of your control.
Right.
So if that's the only thing you got going on, you kind of get hosed.
So there's one of there's another sort of topic that's come up on the DSL podcast before, which is the topic sort of balancing project-based work and sort of research type work. So a lot of projects like are blessed maybe by yourself or by the business side or both before they get underway. But sometimes projects come from just messing around with data. And, obviously you have to have some business acumen. You can't just be like literally just like, hey, I built art out of this data or something. Like it's got to have some value, right? And some spitballing. So like how much would you say like that sort of like not blessed by, say, like a business user, or maybe you're even skeptical yourself as a DSL, like how much of that do you allow in sort of your team to go on?
We've said that, we want to have somewhere between 10 and 12% of your time where you're just goofing off, you're trying stuff, you're
and learning, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. One guy was playing around with neural nets and he wanted to try a long short-term memory architecture, and I said, sure, go ahead and do it. And he came back to the team and gave us a really nice tutorial on where it worked and where it didn't work and that kind of stuff, and that didn't really work as well as I had hoped it would work, because I wanted to have that, that time where people could feel unstructured and relaxed and expansive in their thinking. But, life gets in the way, your projects get in the way. So what I did is I changed it around to, when we're scoping a project and we're going to do a project and you're building the project charter, that, the front part of the project should have a component where you're doing blue sky thinking and just out of the box innovation. Mm-hmm. So, we finally got the people at CSL, the executives, to understand that, we could not, as a data science team, tell them that the project was going to finish in 6 months or 7 months or 8 months. We could tell them it was probably going to finish somewhere between 8 months and a year, but we didn't really know how much experimentation we were going to do on the front end. And they were like, this is kind of not the way we usually hear executives position things. Yeah. And I'm like, well, we could just do it and get it done, and you would get, 2x improvement, or you can let us experiment and we might come up with something that is 100x better than you've ever seen before in your life. Mm-hmm. And they finally said, and you're going to do that on every project, and we may have a delay of a month or 2 or 3 or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, so you either let us play around and innovate and screw up and fail a few times and come up with something mind-blowingly good, possibly, or we just, get on it, the hamster wheel, and do it and improve it by 2%. Yeah. I'm like, okay, we hired you to do that. We believe you're going to be able to do that. We think that team can make it happen. So we understand there's a little bit of a squish in your beginning of your projects, and we're cool with that.
Yeah, and I'm hearing a little bit of like your artisanal bent coming through there, because I think the artisanal model allows for that spitballing and that creativity and that shoot for the moon sort of mentality. I mean, I think if you have sort of a factory based approach, then you're gonna get the 2x improvement or whatever it is, that is a little bit more formulaic, but you're not going to get the big the big step change improvements that you might want to have happen as a DSL, right? Okay. That's certainly.
And as a CEO and a COO and a CFO, they all read about these huge improvements in the airline magazines or Forbes or wherever they're reading these stories, and they're like, how come we haven't transformed the whole company in the span of a week?
Yeah. I know. Why isn't an AI embedded in everything we do?
Yeah, exactly.
I hear you. Like, I think, there's a whole other podcast episode in terms of, setting expectations. And I think you touched on a bit of it, right? And that, we could probably talk about for another time. But John, this has been awesome. If you haven't read John's books, you can find them on Amazon. You can check them out. And I look forward to reading the future of data. Like, do we have any ETA on that, John?
It's one of those things that, as we talked about, I wrote the last one in 3 months, and my publisher's like, are you going to have it done in 3 months? And I'm like, no, I think it's going to take me about a year to write this book. So yeah, I think probably, what are we in April now? Probably February of next year, something like that.
Well, great. Well, I will, I look forward to reading it. And I thank you again for coming on the DSL podcast. I had a blast. It's been fun. Just a lot of fun, John.
Always fun. I always enjoy the conversations with Dave. I think we probably do get off the rails a little bit more than we should, but it's always great.
Yeah, do not no more advertising to John. That's the big takeaway from this episode. It doesn't work. It's a waste of money.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll talk to you next time, John.
Take care, everybody. Glad to be here. Bye-bye.